Welcome back to the sign of Jonah, part 4. So in this next part, we want to look at when did the clock start and stop ticking in relation to the sign of Jonah, the Son of Man being 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And this seems to be given to us in the scriptures. If we read Matthew 17 verse 22, Jesus said unto them, the Son of Man shall be betrayed, and the third day he shall be raised again. This seems to be the parameters of when the sign of Jonah would be, the 3 days and 3 nights. It would start when he was betrayed, and it would stop when he was raised again. Again, Matthew 20 verse 18, behold, we go up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be betrayed, the start, and then he goes on, and the third day he shall rise again, and that would be the end of the 3 days and the 3 nights. In other passages concerning the 3 days and 3 nights, Jesus says the Son of Man will be delivered unto the Gentiles. But I think that the earliest mark from which we could start counting is when Jesus Christ was betrayed. This seems to make a lot of sense to me as the starting point of Jesus Christ surrendering himself, yielding unto Satan, unto the people, so that this time he could be taken. They tried many times earlier to take him, and his hour had not yet come. Now the appointed time had come, and things started when the Son of Man shall be betrayed. So if we can find that point, it should just be a matter of counting forward from there. Now let's just briefly consider the events a few days earlier leading up to the betrayal of Jesus, and the main event there was the resurrection of Lazarus. Of all the things that Jesus Christ could have done, he did this, and he knew that it would provoke the chief priests and the Pharisees, the enemies of Jesus Christ, the traditional enemies of Jesus Christ. In John 11 verse 47, then gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees a council and said, what do we? For this man doeth many miracles. If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, and the Romans shall come and take away both our place and nation. Well, that was going to happen anyway. In verse 49, and one of them named Caiaphas, being the high priest that same year, said unto them, ye know nothing at all, nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not. Verse 51, and this he spake not of himself, but being a high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus should die for the nation. Now, Caiaphas was an enemy of Jesus Christ, but the Lord Jesus spoke through him, the Holy Ghost spoke through him, and prophesied concerning the impending death of Jesus Christ. In verse 52, and not for that nation only, but that also he should gather together in one the children of God that were scattered abroad. Now, who are the children of God that were scattered abroad? Of course, it must be Israel, who was cast off, lost the name of Israel, and God scattered them among the Gentiles. All of this is in the Old Testament, and we're not going to look at that now. In verse 53, then from that day forth they took counsel together for to put him to death. Now, the scribes and the Pharisees had tried multiple times during the ministry years of Jesus Christ to put him to death, but they were unable to do so. Jesus Christ, knowing that his time is about to be fulfilled, that he must go to the cross, he resurrects Lazarus, knowing full well that it's going to get them hopping mad. A lot of people, religious people today, Christian people today, don't like to do anything that's overtly biblical and Christian for the sake of upsetting other people. However, Jesus Christ does not operate after this matter. Jesus Christ knows all things, and he knew what he was doing was sounding his death knell, but he did it anyway. And it was a good work, and it was a holy work, and they hated him without a cause. So this is the background in the few days before the scribes and the Pharisees actually had the opportunity to take Jesus Christ. We read in Matthew 26 verse 1, it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said unto his disciples, you know that after 2 days, that word after there is meta, amid or during, is the feast of the Passover, and the Son of Man is betrayed to be crucified. Christ knows his betrayal is about to take place. Then assembled together the chief priests and the scribes and the elders of the people unto the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and consulted that they might take Jesus by subtlety and kill him. But they said, no, not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar among the people. So again, we can see that the events immediately leading up to Christ's betrayal, things are really gathering steam. The chief priests, the scribes, and the elders are in a complete frenzy. They're out of their minds. They've got to get rid of Jesus Christ. But they didn't want it to happen on the feast day, the Passover day, lest there be an uproar among the people. So the people schemed, Satan schemed, but God overrode that because Jesus Christ is the Passover lamb himself. And he had to be sacrificed that Passover day that was coming. Let's keep reading. John 13 verse 1. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come. This is very interesting. This gives us some key information. It's before the feast of the Passover. In fact, it's the day before. Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world. He loved them unto the end. Verse 2, Jesus knowing that his hour was come. In verse 2, supper being ended. It's in the evening at some point on this Thursday, which, by the way, is the 13th day of Nisan, the number of sin and rebellion. The devil puts into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. When the time came, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, immediately Simon moves into action. Sorry, I shouldn't say Simon. I mean Simon's son, Judas Iscariot, moves into action. Now we already know working behind the scenes have been the scribes, the Pharisees, and the elders had already been plotting intensely to put Jesus Christ to death. Now the key linchpin in all of this moves into action. Judas Iscariot, the betrayer. And it's no coincidence that it happens at the appointed time when Jesus knew that his hour was come. John 13 verse 1, Jesus knew that his hour was come. But in many other times in the Gospels, we read for certain that Jesus knew that his hour had not yet come. John 2 verse 4, mine hour is not yet come. John 7 verse 6, Jesus said unto them, my time is not yet come. John 7 verse 8, I go not up yet unto this feast, for my time is not yet full come. John 7 verse 30, but no man laid hands on him, because his hour was not yet come. They tried multiple times. The scribes, the Pharisees, the elders, the rulers of the Jews tried multiple times during the ministry years of Jesus Christ to murder him, to put him to death. But it was not possible because his hour had not yet come. But now, immediately before the day of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come. Satan enters into the heart of Judas and he leaves to betray his Lord and Master. The clock has started ticking. Of the same circumstances in Luke 22 verse 1, now the feast of unleavened bread drew nigh, which is called the Passover, and the chief priests and scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people. Then entered Satan into Judas, surnamed Iscariot, being of the number of the 12. And he went his way and communed with the chief priests and captains, how he might betray him unto them. And they were glad and covenanted to give him money. We read about this before in John chapter 13, when Jesus knew that his hour had come. The devil entered into Judas, and he left after supper and went out to speak to the scribes and the Pharisees to covenant to betray him. We've seen in the Gospels concerning the sign of the prophet Jonah that the Son of Man shall be betrayed and be killed, and the third day rise again. The clock starts clicking, I should say the clock starts ticking with the betrayal of Jesus Christ. The betrayal of Jesus Christ is in the Old Testament, in prophecy, in Psalm 41 verse 9, where King David is speaking of his betrayal by his most trusted friend and advisor, Ahithophel. And King David records the words that would much later on apply to King David's greatest son, Jesus Christ. Yea, mine own familiar friend in whom I trusted, which did eat of my bread, hath lifted up his heel against me. Betrayal hurts, and it affected Jesus Christ in his humanity. Anybody who's been betrayed, perhaps you've been betrayed by a spouse. Shocking. It goes right to the core. Perhaps you've been betrayed by a very close and dear friend of many years. Perhaps you were in a family where one of your parents left for no explicable reason, just got up and walked out of the family. What a betrayal. And those things have affected you all of your life. Did my mother or my father really ever love me? You wonder. And it hurts. And Jesus knows what betrayal feels like. We would be wrong to assume that Jesus was somehow flippant about it because he knew all things and he knew that Judas Iscariot was the betrayer aforetime. Of course he knew that. As God, he knows all things. But as man, we have to understand Jesus Christ is fully God and fully man, and we have to look at both aspects of things when we are dealing with Jesus Christ, and we need to see also the human side of things. It affected Jesus Christ. We're not given the details of how it affected Jesus Christ in the New Testament, in the Gospels. But be assured, if you know what betrayal is like and you've been betrayed, Jesus knows that as well. King David knew of it, and he wrote there grievingly in Psalm 41 verse 9 of Ahithophel, who was his trusted friend, his spiritual advisor, which did eat at the same table as King David and turned against him when the tide changed, when Absalom, King David's son, rose up and rebelled against his father. Ahithophel joined ship with Absalom. What treachery! And if you go back and read the story of those events concerning David and Absalom, the thing that Ahithophel did was disgusting and vile. And you can read about that yourselves in the book of, it's either in Kings or in Chronicles. But concerning Jesus Christ, he's been tempted in all points as we. He has empathy. He can have empathy. If anyone has been betrayed and wounded and hurt, Jesus knows. Praise his name. He knows all things. He was made perfect through suffering. Now we're still in the same day at the moment, the day of betrayal, the day before the Passover. In Matthew 26 verse 14 it is said, Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went unto the chief priests and said unto them, What will you give me, and I will deliver him unto you? And they covenanted with him for 30 pieces of silver. And from that time he saw opportunity to betray him. Now in verse 17 we go to the next day, Passover day, the 14th day of Nisan. Now the first day of the feast of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying unto him, Where wilt thou that we prepare for thee to eat the Passover? This day, now the first day of unleavened bread, the day of the Passover, is the day that Jesus Christ is going to eat the Passover with his disciples and also be slain as the true Passover lamb. Now again, still at the same time, in Mark 14 verse 1, after the Greek word meta and mid, 2 days was the feast of the Passover, and of unleavened bread, and the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might take him by craft and put him to death. But they said, no, not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar of the people. In verse 10, and Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went unto the chief priests to betray him unto them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money, and he sought how he might conveniently betray him. So all of these events are the events immediately before Passover day. Jesus Christ is betrayed. His hour had come. I'll end part 4 here. We are at the point of the 13th day of Nisan, the day before the Passover. Jesus Christ is being betrayed by Judas. We'll go to the next day in part 5.